So without further ado, Izzy and Margie, I'll have you take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Kevin, for that introduction. Thank you to the Secular Student Alliance for having us. And thank you to those of you tuning in right now and joining us for the closing out of Saturday's sessions. So just give me one moment here to pull up our presentation. Great. So you should be seeing a screen with our presentation title. And as Kevin noted, you have both myself and Margie here with you today.
Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here and to speak on this topic. It's something that's been really important to our advocacy work. So as mentioned before, I'm the Social Justice and Policy Coordinator at the American Humanist Association. And today I will be specifically speaking on legislative advocacy, relationship building, and outreach.
So as you just saw in the introductory video, but I'll mention again for those of you that may not be familiar with the AHA, we were founded in 1941. We're headquartered in Washington, D.C., and we work to protect the rights of humanists, atheists, and non-theistic Americans. The longer version of our mission, of course, is to advance the ethical and life-affirming worldview of humanism, which without beliefs in any gods or other supernatural forces encourages individuals to live informed and meaningful lives that aspire to the greater good of humanity. Put shortly, good without a God, which is our slogan.
Yeah, and our organization is developing and growing. Our strategic plan for the next 3 years will focus on these following goals, which is elevating the profile of humanism in society, seeking equality for humanists among theists, expanding humanist involvement in social justice, broadening community opportunities for humanists, and accelerating participation by young humanists. Our work on our partnerships and with our unlikely allies is essential to furthering these goals, which is why we put a significant amount of time and effort into it.
So to start with kind of a top-down view of the work that we do have resources called Pathways to Humanism, and this serves as kind of an entry access point for people that might identify with theist labels. So you'll see here, Hindu, Muslim, Jewish, pagan. There are still common values that we share as secular humanists, religious humanists, or people of other theistic identities. And so I bring this to your attention just as kind of a point to start our presentation, because the work that we do, we encourage productive dialogue about the philosophy of humanists and our common values, whether that be from a legal avenue or legislative avenue. There are bridges that we can build with theistic perspectives.
Yeah, our goal is not to indoctrinate or convert anyone into humanism through the pathways, but to build bridges between our way of life and other religions so we can communicate with each other better, as Izzy had noted.
So another thing that was shown in that video, we have our 10 commitments, and this is just a pinwheel of sort of the principles that we uphold as humanists. And so today we're going to be focusing on peace and social justice, and this promotes the human rights of all people and understanding among all nations, cultural and religious groups. We attain peace only by consistently responding to injustice through thoughtful conflict resolution that aims to repair harms and ensure a fair and equitable society moving forward. By working with instead of against each other, we can help protect the inherent human rights of everyone, both locally and abroad. So on the legal side of things, you'll see me focus on a national scale. But as Margie dives into sort of the social justice and legislative advocacy, you'll see how our work with those coalitions does have an international impact as well. So to jump into the legal advocacy efforts, to give you a bit of a background, the legal arm of the AHA was launched in 2006, and we worked to litigate church-state separation cases on a national scale all across the United States at the federal district court level, as well as among the appellate courts, and we've gone as high as the Supreme Court as well. So we're currently staffed by myself and our legal director and senior counsel, Monica Miller. We also consult with cooperating attorneys who serve as our local counsel in some instances. And of course, those of you joining are probably well aware of the First Amendment. To just kind of make sure that we're all starting on the same page, the First Amendment contains what's known as the Establishment Clause. And to cite from the language, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So this makes up our First Amendment. And then of course, by way of the 14th Amendment, it is applied to the states. And in the course of our advocacy work, we actually work with a diverse group of religious groups and ideological perspectives. So our organization, if it wasn't already on your radar, you may have seen us in the media because of a case up at the Supreme Court called American Legion versus American Humanist Association. And this case centered around a 40-foot cross on government land that the government explained was a secular symbol dedication to veterans. And of course, we argued, nope, this is unconstitutional. It clearly is the foremost symbol of Christianity, and it has no business being maintained on government land. So this is a court sketch depiction of our senior counsel, Monica Miller, arguing in front of the Supreme Court justices in this case. And I want you just to take a look at the fact that you see here Justice Kavanaugh and Justice Gorsuch on both ends. And just keep in mind that when framing legal arguments, you have to keep in mind people's biases and of course, religious identities. So by having various different religious groups submit friend of the court or amicus briefs on our behalf, that was a very powerful way to show justices that no, groups that are both theist and non-theist find issue with a cross being maintained on government property. And these arguments that were submitted by religious groups in support of our position were actually included in some of the questions that the justices asked during oral argument. So all this is to say that it's a very powerful thing to have allies at the highest court in the land, you know, providing the perspective of a theist group, because it gives the justices a reason to pause. And again, a reason for them to kind of question their own religious biases and understand the perspective of non-Christian or even Christian perspectives. So these amicus groups included the Jewish War Veterans of the US, the Military Religious Freedom Foundation, secular groups that you're probably very familiar with, including the Freedom from Religion Foundation, the Center for Inquiry, American Atheists, Military Association of Atheists and Freethinkers, as well as the Secular Coalition of America. And then of note here, you'll see that the Baptist Joint Committee submitted an amicus brief in support of our position as well. And to quote language specifically from their brief, Holly Holman, who is the general counsel for the Baptist Joint Committee, stated, "The cross is the most recognizable symbol of the central premise of Christianity. While Christians commonly display the cross to promote Christian teachings as revealed in Scripture, the government should not. The cross is a symbol that is specific to Christianity, and the government's efforts to claim otherwise are hollow and offensive. In order to maintain a government-sponsored cross, the government and its supporters simultaneously betray the principle of religious neutrality and demean religion. People of all faith traditions are harmed when the government violates its fundamental obligation to remain neutral between religions." And of course, as those of you may know, ultimately in June 2019, the Supreme Court upheld the constitutionality of the cross, but they did so in a very convoluted historical grounds way without actually overturning our three-prong lemon test. So we still consider that to be sort of, damage control and obviously are very thankful for the work of our religious allies in pointing out to the court that you can be devoutly religious, but at the same time recognize the obvious issue of having a 40-foot symbol of Christianity on government property. So another instance of partnering with other groups is our Arkansas 10 Commandments case. And this is a photo of the 10 Commandments case, a 10 Commandments monument as it sits on Little Rock Capitol grounds in Arkansas. This is a photo from the Arkansas Democrat Gazette. And this case involves plaintiffs that are represented both by the ACLU, the Freedom from Religion Foundation, the American Humanist Association, and then intervening in this case is actually the Satanic Temple. Now, the Satanic Temple makes a lot of headlines, usually because of sort of the satirical nature of the work that they do, but you really can't overstate the importance of the work that they do and the perspective that they bring in these types of cases and in the media in general. Because the way that they go about cases is to show that in order for you to have truly neutral application of the law, if you're going to allow a clear, Christian monument of the 10 Commandments, then that also means that you have to allow a statue that the Satanists put out as representational of their religion. So I point out this partnership as another example of the importance of working with other groups, even if it's, the Pastafarians or the Satanic Temple, because of the work that they're able to do in the courts when it comes to making sure that there is true religious freedom and that laws are applied equitably and neutrally. And then finally, we'll take a look at this case that was also before the Supreme Court this term, called Uzik Bhunam versus Przewski. And this was actually a case brought by the Alliance Defending Freedom, which, if you know anything about them, they're an American conservative Christian nonprofit advocacy work. And in fact, back again in the American Legion Bladensburg Cross case, they were opponents. They supported the other side. And in this case, we actually supported their arguments at the Supreme Court. And it circled around the idea of nominal damages, which nominal damages generally amount to $1, but the $1 is a tangible representation of the fact that a constitutional right has been violated. So when you think about property damages, generally someone might sue, and they'll sue for the value of that lost property or damaged property. But in the case of First Amendment violations, it's very difficult for a court to put an exact dollar amount on that harm. Sure, they can, issue attorney's fees, but then what are you giving to the plaintiff to redress that violation? So that's where nominal damages are a really important mechanism for organizations like the AHA or even the ADF to be able to fight these types of constitutional cases. So in our brief, we wrote, while the AHA and ADF stand on opposite sides of the ideological spectrum and disagree on the proper interpretation of the Establishment Clause, the AHA and ADF unite in their esteem for First Amendment liberties and our conviction that such rights are meaningless if they cannot be vindicated. A society of ordered liberty such as ours demands that governments be held accountable for violating citizens' constitutional rights. We also included, now is not the time to embolden the government to experiment on our liberties. Now is not the time to tell citizens their First Amendment rights do not matter. Now is the time to instill confidence in an anxious America and celebrate a constitutional heritage strong enough to unite the likes of AHA and ADF. So all of these various court examples exemplify the importance of us working with other religious, secular, normally ideologically opposed groups in order to work on the mission of church-state separation. And with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Margie.
Thanks, Izzy. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the department I work in. So I work in the Policy and Social Justice Department. We work on advocating on the separation of church and state, as well as social justice issues. When it comes to the separation of church and state, we've advocated on the blasphemy resolution, which we actually led on, and the National Day of Reason. When it comes to more social justice legislation that we've also advocated on, we've advocated and supported HR 40, the Commission to Study Reparations, the Equality Act, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, and COVID-19 testing, treatment, and cash payments for all, regardless of immigration status, just to name a couple. We also do work with the Congressional Free Thought Caucus. The Congressional Free Thought Caucus is a caucus in the House of Representatives that promotes policy based on science and reason and defends secular government. So we do work with them, and we also have some social justice programming, and we developed the social justice alliances. So we've done some social justice programming kind of separate from our advocacy work. We've worked in developing our social justice alliances so they can lead on programming they're passionate about, but we've also created programming that's included writing grants, micro grants, and anti-racism training. So our staff specifically includes the Policy and Social Justice Director, which is Rachel Deitch, and the coordinator, which is my position. Next slide. So another part of our advocacy arm is the Center for Free Thought Equality. So they're specifically the advocacy and political arm of the American Humanist Association. The staff includes Ron Millar, who's the political impact coordinator, and Rachel's also the director of policy and social justice for the CFE. So the CFE, if you're interested in becoming a member, you can do so for free, and you can learn more about the candidates that the CFE endorses. So I wanted to touch a little bit on social justice. So our organization has advocated in Congress on the separation of church and state for a while now, but since the addition of the social justice coordinator position about 5 or 6 years ago, we really started to incorporate it internally as well as externally into the work that we do. And it's really important for us when it comes to social justice to developing partnerships as well as developing allies, because a lot of our allies come from the social justice work that we do, as well as the social justice work that matters to us. So I added here 2 quotes that I think really exemplify kind of what social justice means currently at the American Humanist Association. While the work isn't perfect at what we're doing, and it's always ongoing, and as we're growing and learning, I think it's such an important part of building relationships with partners that it's something that deserves its own slide. So I'm just going to quickly read these quotes just kind of to kind of set the stage for the rest of the things that I'm going to speak on. So AHA takes an intersectional view on social justice issues, recognizing that working to liberate all marginalized communities is the best way to lift the prospects of any one group. And then the second quote that I really like is, regardless of race, ethnicity, economic status, ability, sexual orientation, gender identity, religious belief or non-belief, or citizenship, all individuals have universal human rights that must be respected and protected. Okay, so I'm going to move over to pivot back to our legislative and advocacy work, just to talk about how we've made unlikely allies through advocacy work. So one of the biggest ways we've done this is through joining coalitions. We've done a lot of relationship building and joint efforts, which has led us to become part of really great coalitions. Some of the coalitions we've joined, the first one is WISC, which is the Washington Interfaith Staff Community. So it's actually an interfaith coalition of religious organizations and humanist ones that unite to further the common goals that we have, legislative common goals. And those goals I found are often rooted in social justice issues that matter to us. So it's a really great coalition to talk about ideas, as well as policy advocacy often rooted in social justice. Another great coalition or organization that we're a member of is the Leadership Conference for Civil and Human Rights. which we are a member of, and our staff take part in such a large array of smaller coalition task forces under this umbrella. So I'm personally part of the immigration task force, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, but I've definitely learned a lot of information from that task force, and it's been really helpful to reach our advocacy goals. And then there's also two other ones, the Amigos Coalition, which is an immigrant rights coalition that I've been working on, as well, and it's not listed on here, but the Small Lobby, which is a coalition of organizations that support reproductive rights at the federal level. Now, so as you can see, these are coalitions across the political and advocacy spectrum, but because a lot of their ideals and a lot of their advocacy goals do align with some of the things that we're trying to promote, joining these coalitions and developing these relationships have been very important when it comes to pushing our own advocacy goals, as well as working on advocacy campaigns. So I'm gonna again pivot back to actually working with legislative offices as a way as we've built unlikely allies. So we've recently worked on resolutions calling for the global repeal of blasphemy, heresy, and apostasy laws. Something that's really interesting about our work on the blasphemy resolution is that in the House, we actually worked with Representative Jamie Raskin, who's the co-chair of the Congressional Free Thought Caucus, and he's a Democrat. And then in the Senate, it was actually sponsored by Senator James Lankford, who is a Republican. So very different offices. Senator James Lankford, I think, used to be a minister before he actually moved on to work in Congress. So very different ideals, but both of them have a very, very strong passion for religious liberty. So we developed relationships with these two offices, and while these two offices have very different political ideals and different goals, their passion that they share for religious liberty was good enough, and we developed that relationship where we were able to work and to get them to sponsor this legislation and get it passed in the House and the Senate. So having that unlikely ally of working with legislative offices from across quote unquote political spectrums, and still moving forward to promote advocacy issues that we care about was really helpful, especially when it came to the blasphemy, resolution. So that was a really cool thing to see. So the next thing we're going to talk about is Mubarak Bala. So another example of us, of our work in terms of developing unlikely allies is the work we've done in defending humanist leader Mubarak Bala. So Mubarak Bala was arrested in Nigeria following a Facebook post he made stating, "Fact is, you have no life after this one. You have been dead before, long before you were born, billions of years of death." He is yet to be charged, but many believe he will be charged with blasphemy. So we have been working with Humanist International to bring attention to this horrific case of religious persecution. But for a case like this, it's really important that you get a lot of international pressure. So we really had to work with the US State Department, work with organizations, work with like the US government to try to put more pressure and to really heighten this issue. So we actually ended up working with Ambassador at Large Sam Brownback, and his views on religious liberty are very different, not very different, but they're significantly different than what the AHA's is. But even so, we developed a relationship with him and we're able to work with him among a bunch of other organizations. And he actually made a statement condemning the arrest of Mubarak Bala. And that's such an important and pivotal thing to happen, because to have someone who is part of the United States Commission of International and Religious Freedom putting a statement and eventually making him a prisoner of conscience, it puts an exorbitant amount of pressure on Nigeria to release him and to allow him to see his lawyers, which he hasn't done lately. So again, if we took it at face value, we wouldn't think that maybe Ambassador at Large Sam Brownback would be willing to do that, but he was, and he was very, against this arrest. And Mubarak Bala has yet to been charged, so we're hoping that with continued pressure that we will be able to get him at least a trial, but as of now, there hasn't been any updates. Okay, the next thing I'm going to talk about unlikely allies is immigrant rights. So our Latinx Humanist Alliance was interested in working on an advocacy campaign that helped the immigrant community during the COVID-19 pandemic, but also was an issue that aligned with AHA values. Now that's how we got to COVID-19 testing, treatment, and cash payments for all, regardless of immigration status. AHA is a big proponent on vaccines, and then this is also very supportive of the immigrant community. It's important to have access to healthcare during a pandemic, especially one that really affects, the more people that get vaccinated and have access to treatment, the better it would be for our country to move forward out of the pandemic, but also in terms of like human rights, to have access to healthcare during a health emergency is very important. So this is something that we've all decided on. And what's interesting is that since this was the first of this type of advocacy that we've ever done, the AHA isn't known for immigrant rights, but I actually ended up joining immigrant rights coalitions, and through that, I was able to work with organizations that actually lead on this issue. So I joined the Immigration Task Force at the Leadership Conference for Civil and Human Rights, and I actually met someone from the ACLU who was leading on this issue. And they gave us such great information. They gave us resources, op-eds that they drafted. We were actually able to get an op-ed in the San Francisco Chronicle, which is one of like the biggest circulating newspapers in San Francisco. And a lot of that was through like a lot of messaging help from the ACLU. So it was really great to join those efforts and to get a lot of information. I'm sorry for my cat over there. To get a lot of great information from them. So really joining those partnerships has been really helpful when it comes to making like unlikely allies. They also recommended us to join another coalition, the Amigos Coalition. So you may wonder why we would join to Immigrant Rights Coalition, but the Amigos Coalition is so fantastic because they meet weekly. There's always new updates on immigrant rights and also on a bunch of different legislation that we've also been supporting even before we were looking at supporting immigrant rights. So there was a lot of conversation on the No Ban Act, and especially a conversation on the refugee cap, which has been a little bit lower than was originally, we originally wanted. So there was a lot of great information coming in through the Amigos Coalition, and it's still coming through as well. So it was really great that we got involved in these issues and also started developing partnerships with immigrant rights organizations. And even though that isn't what we necessarily lead on. So general goals. Our general goals really are to develop unlikely allies, to work on advocacy issues that align with AHA policy positions, to take an intersectional and social justice oriented approach in the work that we do, and to develop relationships with partners on aligned goals to push for common interests. With that, that's the end of the advocacy and legislative part. I'm going to turn it back over to Izzy. Thank you everyone for coming and joining our presentation. I hope my cat isn't distracting. He just chose today to be especially bad. So I'm going to turn it back to you, Izzy.
Thanks, Margie. I think we all appreciate lighthearted pet appearances in this virtual setting. So I wanted to make sure that everyone was aware that you have the opportunity to get involved with us by joining the Humanist Legal Society, which is a network of legal professionals, but also students and law professors, and students can actually join for free. So if constitutional advocacy is something you are interested in, we'd love to have you as part of that network. If you find yourself going to law school and becoming licensed, we also have opportunities for cooperating attorneys to serve as our local counsel bench and to do ad hoc pro bono needs. So again, reach out to us about that. And then as Margie mentioned earlier, we do political advocacy through our Center for Free Thought Equality, which does candidate endorsements and looks for both openly atheist, agnostic candidates, but also those that are allied, and you can join for free. And then here you'll see our social media information. We encourage you to follow us on all our channels. And I hope that you'll follow along with our Legal Tuesday segments, which is posted on Facebook fortnightly, also on our YouTube channel, and all of our episodes are closed captioned. And you can submit questions for our legal director, be it about In God We Trust or other issues that you have that you see in your community. And then, of course, we can't go without mentioning our upcoming conference. So just like SSA is hosting their conference right now, we will be hosting our annual conference July 24th and 25th. And please look out for registration information on that. So with that, I'm going to end this screen share, and Margie and I will be on hand to take your questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that presentation. We do have a couple questions that have come in, but again, if anyone would like to ask questions, please just type those in the Q&A portion, and we will get those over to Izzy and to Margie. So I think just a clarification, Ruth, during I think your talk, you did a mention of other religions, and so I think just as a clarification, you weren't referring to non-religion as a religion.
Yeah, no. I mean, the one distinction I would make, though, is that in a court, you know, Pastafarianism and the Satanic Temple are owed the same, you know, level of consideration by the court as Christianity and Buddhism. So in that sense, other religions does apply, but specifically through a legal lens.
No, and I think that's a great clarification to make, and it's important for people to understand that differentiation. So that perfect. And just sort of the build off, Neil wrote on the topic of the Satanic Temple, any thoughts on if AHA would encourage them to join the Secular Coalition of America or other secular communities?
Yeah, so I can't necessarily speak to what's already been considered by the Satanic Temple, but I do see their mission as kind of being parallel to the work of those of us that are already involved in the Secular Coalition of America, but not necessarily exact. Because again, the way that they approach advocacy for true religious freedom is to earn respect of their religion. And that, you know, that obviously is the tenets of Satanism and the tenets of, for example, Pastafarianism. And those are their own avenues for going about similar outcomes, but not exactly with the same approach. So I'm not so sure that they would be a natural fit for the Secular Coalition for America.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned the tenets of the Satanic Temple and some valid, very valid tenets, and I would argue very humanistic in their language and mission. But I think they've taken very much the stance of we're going to be a religion in that sense, so that we can conversely combat the freedom of religion, which, not the way our organizations have chosen to do it. But there are some things that they can get into, avenues and those sorts of things that we don't have the same basis or standing to be able to do that because of that. So, there's different ways to eat pie. Don't know. I'm sure there's a better metaphor for that, but that's what came to my mind. Okay, so we have one more question, and I guess current events sort of things. Just regarding the Humanist of the Year and Dawkins, and I think everyone's familiar with what that was taking place. And I think Neil was saying congratulations and thinking that AHA did a good job in standing for their values and those sorts of things. He says, can you speak on any future plans from the American Humanist Association on correcting past misplaced hero worship?
Yeah, sure. So Margie, obviously feel free to speak to this. I would say that the way that our organization works is both the awards that are delved out and retracted, all of those votes take place through the board, not through AHA staffers. But I'd also say in general, we found it's kind of difficult because the thing with any organization and commending people for achievements is that they're just that, they're people. And sometimes people are fallible. And so you are, on 1 year commending them for their efforts. And a few years later, they do something, that totally flies in the face of what our humanist values are. And we hope that in, if not all, we are getting to those instances and, correcting and making sure we stand for our values. And that's what we did in the instance of Dawkins, making sure that we stand strong in support of transgender identity. And Margie, I don't know if you want to speak to that as well.
Yeah, I think that's something that's really important to our department. So as a policy and social justice coordinator, it's really important to uphold social justice within our internal efforts as well as our external efforts, because then that misalignment eventually comes out and it shows. So something that I personally work towards is that if there's any issues or anything that I come up with or that comes to my awareness that I see is misaligned, where the Dawkins thing was caught before I even knew that it was going on. But once things start to come into light in terms of we're having issues when it comes to social justice, or people are saying really terrible things and we're hero worshiping people who maybe shouldn't be. I'm someone who especially works on pushing to make sure that we are taking active steps to either address those issues or to do something that, where we acknowledge or, do what the board did is strip the person of the Humanist of the Year award. So as a staffer, I'm someone who would advocate on having someone who's done something that's harmed other people and really pushing and making sure that these issues are addressed. And as I guess the social justice portion of my position, that is something that I especially look towards to make sure that we aren't promoting people who are harmful, but are also creating issues. And I understand where, as you say, where people are people are people, but I think it's still important that we push social justice and hold ourselves to that. We aren't perfect, and we're still working really hard on trying to work on our internal and external work. But yeah, that's something that I really is really important to me, as I know is really important to Izzy. And that's one of the great things about AHA, at least the staff that I work with now. They really do care about social justice. So I'm excited to see the future of AHA and, moving beyond hero worshiping and more just being, looking at kind of other options besides that.
Well, and I think as Izzy pointed out, that decision was made by the AHA board, was not made by the staff or influenced by the staff. And so clearly it affects a message from the entire organization, but the board of directors is the one who made that decision for AHA and not the staff with that. And I think with the Secular Student Alliance, one of our core values of our organization is diversity and inclusion. And we look at the number and the percentage of our students and our members who are lesbian, gay, and bisexual, but also the number who are transgender and gender nonconforming. And I think when we look at the way religion has impacted the LGBT community, and especially now the trans community, I think, and the parallels between lesbian and gay and trans, especially when you get into, while sexual orientation and gender identity are very different things, the basis of this discrimination from a religion comes from a very similar place. And I think within the secular community, we do a justice of preserving that inherent the value of diversity, the value of inclusion, and supporting, especially at this time, trans people who are humans and who have every right to be their true authentic selves as everyone else on this planet. So we're out of questions. I just want to know if you guys had any final words or comments to end on.
Just want to reiterate our gratitude for having us on for this presentation. I actually was involved in the Secular Student Alliance as a college student at Mason, so I'm super thrilled to have students involved and find a cause in secularism so soon. And thank you again for having us, Margie.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. I'm really excited to present at the Secular Student Alliance. I'm actually a little bit new to the humanist kind of like the humanist movement. I started working at the AHA a year ago, and I really appreciate being able to present as well as get to know folks and be able to learn about all these great ideas and kind of talk to them about these ideas to you as well.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, guys, for your presentation today and spending a little bit of your evening, my afternoon, with us. And I have to say, I love that you shared that, Izzy, that you're a former SSA. You're SSA alum. So once an SSA member, always part of the family. So that's fantastic. And I always love how many SSA students and alum we see in the larger secular movement and in the secular organizations. And so yeah, that's like, we're everywhere. So I love that you pointed that out. Well, so good. That'll be a fun little thing to end on. So thank you guys very much. Really appreciate it. This is the end of our programming for our conference today. We do have a full day of sessions tomorrow. So please, you can hit the schedule online, RSVP for those sessions that you're interested in. And we, have another round of great speakers. So thank you very much. And we appreciate you being here today. Bye.